Last summer, just after I finished my grade 11 school year, my safe little suburban life was turned upside down. My parents are pretty protective, always reminding me about the dangers outside our safe neighborhood. But I guess every teenager wants a bit of freedom, right? That's how I felt when I decided to sneak out one night to meet my new boyfriend, Jake. We had planned to meet at a diner 10 miles away. Before going to bed, I quietly placed my bicycle outside. I didn't want to risk opening the garage door and waking up my parents. Once they were asleep, I slipped out of the house and started my journey, taking a back road that ran along fields on one side and the neighborhood on the other. It was really dark, and the only light came from the occasional street lamp on the other side of the houses. The night was eerily silent, with just the sound of my bike tires on the gravel road and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. The fields on my left looked like a black sea, endless and empty. But I kept going, just looking ahead of me, excited to see Jake and have an adventure of my own. Little did I know, this night would become a terrifying experience I'd never forget. I was halfway to the diner when I felt my front tire wobbling. I lost balance and almost fell. I steadied myself and stopped the bike. Using my phone's flashlight, I saw a piece of old, sun-faded glass stuck in the flat tire. Now I had a problem. I was exactly halfway, with 5 miles to go. The darkness around me seemed to grow thicker, and every little sound made me jumpy. I decided to keep going towards Jake instead of turning back. I tried calling him, but he didn't answer. So I sent him a text, explaining what happened, and that I was walking the rest of the way. I told him I was scared. As I walked, the silence was eerie. Every rustle of leaves and distant animal sound made my heart race. The fields on one side seemed to stretch forever into the darkness, and the houses on the other side were mostly dark, their residents fast asleep. About 30 minutes later, I was still walking when I heard a car coming from behind. Its headlights cut through the darkness, making my shadow stretch out long and thin in front of me. The car slowed down and stopped next to me. The driver, a middle-aged man with a friendly face, rolled down the window and asked if I needed a ride. At first, I felt relieved. "Yes, please," I said, thinking how lucky I was. But as soon as I got in, something felt off. The man locked the doors with a click that sounded way too loud in the silence of the night. I felt my stomach do a flip. The man started driving, but instead of heading towards the diner, he took a turn that led in the opposite direction. The fear was real, but I told myself I have to pretend to stay calm. The darkness outside the car windows felt like it was closing in on me. I glanced at the man, his face now shadowed and unreadable. I realized I was trapped with a stranger, and I had no idea where he was taking me. In my best attempt to keep my voice calm and steady, I casually mentioned that he was going the wrong way. He ignored me, his face twisting into a sinister smile. It was clear that he meant to harm me. I looked to the right and subtly held my phone below the seat on my side and glanced at it. I saw several missed calls from Jake and my parents. My phone had been on silent, so I didn't hear them. Panic set in as I understood they were worried about me, and for good reason. I subtly tried to drop a pin to Jake, hoping he would see it and do something. The man noticed me fiddling with my phone and slapped it out of my hand, swerving the car. My heart started beating uncontrollably. "What do you think you are doing?" he said in a low, menacing voice. Tears filled my eyes as I looked out the window, trying to think of a way to escape. The dark fields seemed to stretch on forever, offering no hope of rescue. Just when I became overwhelmed with thoughts about what he might do to me, and that my stupid decision is going to mean that I will never see my family again, I saw headlights approaching fast from behind. The car's lights grew brighter and closer. The car drove up alongside the car. It was my dad. He forced us off the road. The man, cursing aggressively, realizing he had no choice, unlocked the doors and pushed me out before speeding away, leaving the car door still open. I stumbled out of the car and into my dad's arms, shaking and crying. He hugged me tightly, and I had never felt so safe in my life. The man's car disappeared into the darkness, and my dad tried to get the license plate number, but it was too dark to see. Jake had called my dad right after he got my text, and my dad used a phone tracker to find me. If it weren't for Jake and my dad, who knows what could have happened. I shudder to think about it. When we got home, my parents called the police. We reported the car and the man's description, but they never found him. The memory of his sinister smile and the way he slapped my phone out of my hand still haunts me. That night changed everything for me. My parents and I had a long talk. They were thankful to Jake for calling them, but they were also worried about the risk I had taken by sneaking out and that Jake would put me in that situation. I could see the fear in their eyes, and it made me feel guilty and ashamed. They told me I had a lot of growing up to do. They suggested I take a break from my relationship with Jake to seek counseling and rebuild trust with them. I agreed. I knew I needed to make things right and prove to them that I could be responsible. That night, I learned how dangerous the world can be and how important it is to make safe choices. It was a terrifying experience, but it brought me closer to my parents and taught me a lesson I'll never forget. Now, every time I think about sneaking out or making a risky decision, I remember that night and the fear I felt. It's a reminder that safety always comes first. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood. My life is pretty normal. I'm an average student, and people say I'm responsible. Maybe that's because I don't get into trouble much. My parents are really strict. They always tell me about how dangerous the world can be. They like to keep me safe and cozy at home. But sometimes, I feel like I'm missing out. My friends always have these crazy stories about parties and adventures. They make it sound so exciting. So, one night, I decided to do something I've never done before. I decided to sneak out of the house. There was this rave happening in a field just outside of town. Everyone was talking about it. They said it was going to be amazing, with loud music and lots of people. I wanted to see what it was like. I wanted to feel that thrill. So, I waited until my parents were asleep. My heart was pounding as I climbed out of my bedroom window. It was the first time I'd ever done something like this. I met up with my friend Lisa, and we drove to the rave. I was nervous, but also excited. I had no idea what was waiting for me that night. I climbed out of my bedroom window, trying to make as little noise as possible. It was a mix of fear and excitement. I had never done anything like this before. My parents would freak out if they knew. But tonight, I didn't care. I met up with my friend Lisa, and we drove to the rave. It was in a secluded field surrounded by dense woods. When we got there, the music was so loud it made my chest vibrate. The area was packed with teenagers and young adults. The air was thick with the smell of alcohol and smoke. It was overwhelming and kind of scary. We joined the crowd, but I felt uneasy. I saw people taking drugs openly. Some of them looked way too young to be here. The carefree atmosphere started to feel wrong. This wasn't just fun and games. While we were dancing, I heard a commotion near the edge of the field. I turned and saw a fight break out between two groups. It got violent fast, with shouts and the sound of breaking glass. This wasn't what I had imagined. I grabbed Lisa's arm and pulled her away, trying to find a safer spot. As we moved through the crowd, I noticed a girl lying on the ground. She looked familiar. It was a girl from my school. She was pale and unresponsive. Even though I had never seen it, I knew right away. She had overdosed. I could feel panic rising inside me. The rave's chaos continued around us. Most people were oblivious or didn't care about the girl on the ground. I felt helpless and scared. This night was turning into a nightmare, and I didn't know how to fix it. I knelt beside the girl, shaking her shoulders and calling out to her. She didn't respond. My hands were trembling. Lisa pulled out her phone to call for help, but there was no signal. We were completely cut off. I shouted at the people around us, trying to get their attention. "She needs help," I yelled. But most of them were too drunk or high to understand. Some of them even laughed, thinking it was just part of the night's drama. It made me feel sick. Desperation mounting, I remembered the farmhouse we passed on the way to the rave. "We need to get her to that farmhouse," I said to Lisa. She nodded, her face pale with fear. We tried to lift the girl, but she was heavier than she looked. As we struggled, a few partygoers noticed and started shouting at us to leave her and not ruin the party. One guy even tried to block our way, but we pushed past him. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, we managed to get her up and started carrying her through the dark field. The music from the rave faded, replaced by the eerie sounds of the night. Every rustle and shadow creeped me out. It felt like eyes were watching us from the woods. The journey to the farmhouse seemed endless. The girl's condition was getting worse with every step we took. Her breathing was shallow, and she was cold to the touch. The fear of her dying in our arms pushed us to move faster, even though we were exhausted and scared out of our minds. Branches scratched our faces and arms as we stumbled through the woods. The darkness was suffocating, and I could barely see where we were going. I kept thinking about what would happen if we didn't make it in time. I couldn't let that happen. We had to save her. Finally, we saw the faint outline of the farmhouse. We were so close. We just had to hold on a little longer. We finally reached the farmhouse. I was out of breath, and my arms were aching, but we couldn't stop now. I pounded on the door with all my strength, praying someone would answer. The seconds felt like forever. At last, the door creaked open. An elderly couple stood there looking confused and worried. The old man had a flashlight, and the beam hit the girl's pale face. "Please, we need help," I begged, my voice cracking. "She's not breathing right. I think she's overdosed." The elderly couple quickly understood the seriousness of the situation. The woman stepped aside and motioned us inside. "Bring her in quickly," she said. Her voice was calm but urgent. We carried the girl into their living room and laid her on the couch. The man grabbed a phone and called someone. I heard him mention a local doctor. They were bypassing the police and an ambulance, knowing it would take too long to get here. The woman brought blankets and wrapped them around the girl, trying to warm her up. I watched, feeling helpless and terrified. Every second counted, and I was scared she might not make it. The old man put his hand on my shoulder. "The doctor lives close by," he said. "He'll be here soon." Lisa and I stood by, shaking and exhausted. I kept looking at the girl's face, hoping to see some sign of improvement. Her breathing was still shallow, and she looked so fragile. Minutes later, we heard a car pull up. The door burst open, and the doctor, a middle-aged man with a serious expression, rushed in. He had a medical bag with him. Without wasting a second, he started checking the girl's vital signs and administering treatment. We watched in silence as the doctor worked quickly. He gave her an injection and checked her pulse. Slowly, her breathing became steadier. The color began to return to her face. The elderly woman hugged me tightly. "You did the right thing, bringing her here," she said softly. "You might have saved her life." I nodded, too choked up to speak. All I could think about was how close she had come to dying. The doctor called an ambulance to come and take the girl to the hospital. After the ambulance left, the doctor offered to give Lisa and me a ride back to our car. We drove home in silence. The night's events had left us both speechless. As I climbed back into my bedroom window, the first light of dawn was starting to break. I was so tired, but I couldn't sleep. I knew I couldn't keep this from my parents. They needed to know, and I needed to tell them. The next morning, I sat down with my mom and dad. They could see something was wrong right away. I took a deep breath and told them everything. I told them about sneaking out, the rave, the girl who overdosed, and how we had saved her life. My parents were shocked and upset, but they listened. They were glad I was safe, and they were proud that Lisa and I had done the right thing in the end. I told them how the experience had made a huge impression on me. I had learned about the dangers of sneaking out and how important it is to be prepared for emergencies. From that day on, I understood why my parents worried so much. I promised them I would be more careful and make better choices. The terror of that night would stay with me forever, a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong and how important it is to be responsible. My friends and I run a YouTube channel where we explore haunted and abandoned places. It was a late, chilly night in our small town. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and it made eerie shadows on the streets. My friends and I had decided to check out the old, abandoned house on Elm Street. Everyone in town said it was haunted, and we wanted to see if we could capture something spooky on camera. The four of us agreed that we would all sneak out of our rooms and homes at 11 p.m. and meet at the 7-Eleven on Main Street and walk together from there. When we got to the house, it looked just as creepy as the stories had said. The house was huge and dark, with broken windows that looked like eyes staring at us. Weeds and vines had taken over the yard, wrapping around the rotting wooden fence. Graffiti covered the walls, and the front door hung open on rusty hinges. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in years, and it really was quite creepy even just to look at. We gathered our gear and pushed the creaky front door open. The inside of the house was even more unsettling. Dust hung in the air, making it hard to breathe. The floorboards creaked with every step, and the only light came from our flashlights. As we looked around, we saw old furniture covered in cobwebs and wallpaper peeling off the walls. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional drip of water from somewhere deep in the house. My friends and I decided to split up to cover more ground. I headed towards the basement, drawn by a strange feeling. The stairs leading down were narrow and steep, and each step groaned under my weight. As I descended, I could feel the temperature drop, and my breath turned to mist in the cold, damp air. When I reached the bottom, I shone my flashlight around and saw something that freaked me out. Fresh footprints in the dust. Someone had been here recently. This wasn't just an abandoned house. It was something much more dangerous. The realization that I might not be alone made me feel ice cold. I moved further into the basement. In the corner, I saw a makeshift table with fresh food on it. Nearby, there were dirty clothes scattered around and a bed made from old, worn blankets. The thought that someone might still be living here made me super uncomfortable. This wasn't just an abandoned house. It was a place someone called home, and I had just intruded. I had to get out, but the fear of what or who might be lurking in the shadows held me in place. Suddenly, I heard footsteps approaching the basement door. I looked around frantically for a place to hide and spotted an old, moldy bookshelf in the corner. I squeezed behind it, trying to make myself as small as possible. The basement door creaked open slowly, the sound echoing in the silent room. A man's shadow loomed on the wall, growing larger as he descended the stairs. My breath caught in my throat as he entered the basement, mumbling incoherently to himself. I could barely make out his words, but they sounded angry and paranoid. The man, clearly mentally unstable, started searching the basement for intruders. He stumbled upon my flashlight and picked it up, his face contorting in rage. "Who's here? Who's trying to steal from me?" he shouted, his voice filled with anger and fear. He began smashing items around the room in a fit of rage, throwing cans and clothes everywhere. The noise was deafening, and I could feel my heart pounding. Suddenly, the man's wild eyes locked onto mine. He had found me. "There you are," he yelled, brandishing a rusted knife. "You're a thief. You came here to steal from me." His eyes were wild with anger and paranoia. I tried to reason with him, my voice shaking. "No, I'm not here to steal. I thought this place was abandoned. I'll leave, I swear." But my words only seemed to make him more agitated. "Liar!" he screamed. He grabbed me by the arm and dragged me across the basement, his grip tight and painful. He pushed me into a corner and slammed the door shut, locking it from the outside. I was trapped. My friends, hearing my screams, thought it was part of the prank at first. "Alex, quit messing around," Jess called down from upstairs. But as my screams grew more desperate, they realized something was very wrong. They rushed to the basement door, but it was locked. "Alex, are you okay?" Ryan shouted, banging on the door. Inside the basement, I could hear them but couldn't respond. The man was closing in on me, his knife glinting in the dim light. I grabbed an old pipe from the floor and swung it at him, trying to keep him at bay. He lunged at me, and we struggled. My friends pounded on the door, trying to break it open. I fought with everything I had, knowing my life depended on it. The struggle with the man seemed to go on forever. I swung the pipe wildly, trying to keep him at a distance, but he was relentless. Just as he lunged at me with the knife, the basement door burst open. My friends, using all their strength, had managed to break it down. Ryan and Jess tackled the man, knocking him to the ground. The knife clattered away, spinning across the floor. Emma found some old ropes in a corner, and together we tied the man up. He thrashed and shouted, his eyes still wild with paranoia, but we held him down until he was securely bound. My hands were shaking, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. "We need to call the police," Ryan said, his voice steady but urgent. We knew our parents would find out that we snuck out, but this was going too far. Jess pulled out her phone and dialed 911, explaining the situation in a rush of words. I tried to calm myself, taking deep breaths. As we waited for the authorities to arrive, I couldn't help but glance at the man tied up on the floor. He was still muttering to himself, his eyes darting around the room. It was clear he was deeply disturbed, and I shuddered to think what might have happened if my friends hadn't broken in when they did. The sound of sirens finally pierced the night, and moments later, police officers flooded the basement. They quickly took control, checking on us and making sure we were unharmed before turning their attention to the man. They read him his rights and escorted him out of the house, his protests growing fainter as he was led away. One of the officers turned to us, his expression serious but kind. "You kids did the right thing by calling us," he said. "But you need to understand how dangerous these places can be. You were lucky this time." He commended us for our quick thinking, but also gave us a stern warning about the risks of exploring abandoned buildings. We felt grateful to leave the house shaken, but unharmed. As we reached the edge of town, I couldn't help but reflect on the experience. I had always loved the thrill of urban exploration, the excitement of discovering the unknown. But tonight had been a harsh reminder of how unpredictable and dangerous these adventures could be. I realized how close I had come to serious harm, and it scared me. Back at home, I reviewed the footage we had recorded. The video was no longer just an exciting adventure for our YouTube channel. It was a stark lesson in the reality of danger. Watching it, I made a decision. I needed to be more cautious in the future, to think twice before taking unnecessary risks. This experience had changed me, and I knew it was time to approach our explorations with a lot more care. As I closed my laptop and prepared for bed, I couldn't get the man's wild eyes out of my head and the cold basement air. This night would stay with me for a long time, a constant reminder to respect the unknown and the risks that come with it.